we didn't know it was going to take 13 years. You don't know. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? But we knew we were never going to quit. And you got to be careful with that mentality too, because it can cost you a lot.
Matt Dallas and I started a moving company 10 years ago, just to help fund our research on the screenplay. Like, that's the level of commitment and love that you have to have for the art of cinema.
Do it.
Okay, a year from now, where are we gonna be?
We're gonna be a year from now. We're gonna be on a set. This is gonna all be worth it.
And also, that's a picture wrap on
Around the age of 8, I started to make, I don't know if it's like, they're like clay figurines, right? Where you have a mold and then you kind of let them set and dry, then you paint them, and started knocking on doors. And I would sell them, but then people, like, it would become like a show. So then I would act out the characters, the figurines, and then that became like, oh, do impressions. And I started knocking on doors in the neighborhood. And I haven't told this either, but I feel like, when I say like I was kind of a loner, which I was a chubby kid with glasses. I was picked on a lot. And so I was the kid on the school bus with headphones on, listening to like gangsta rap. And that was like my escape. I got an academic scholarship to go to university, and this is good, and I'm into it. I'll work towards going pre-med. And I had this thought, I was like, well, what if I just totally go out on a limb and audition for theater school? And so I auditioned for all the top theater schools in New York, and then a few in London, England. And so I got into all of them, and I was very fortunate. I had made a short film based on my grandparents' experience during World War II. And this short film got into the Hollywood Film Festival, and I was nominated for a Hollywood Film Award, and that's what brought me to LA. I knew that I wasn't gonna book parts because I looked like Brad Pitt. I was gonna book parts because I was gonna be the best guy. I was gonna be undeniably great. That's what I had to aim for.
After we do this, we can go.
Go where?
The lake. To the treasure.
There's treasure at the lake?
Sheepdog is the most important thing outside of creating my son that I've ever done. And if it's the last thing I do, I can walk away. I can live. It was a 13-year journey that was hard fought. But, I'm left with gratitude because I was trusted by the veteran community, by the military community, by mental health workers, first responders. And that's a huge honor, but it's also a great responsibility. I fully immersed myself in it, but I was willing to die for it. And that's what makes this journey extraordinary.
Where you are on the red carpet.
I know, you're gonna be crying.
It's tough when people ask me like advice about filmmaking, and it's hard because like the curtain was pulled back. I met the wizard, and I think that component of what a difficult industry that it is, because it's predatory. It can be, everybody has motives, and it's really challenging. And I think that was one of the hardest things for us, is that we weren't willing to be compromised. We were definitely not for sale.
It's wild that you absorbed so much of the characteristics of the veterans that you were studying, including all these traditional type PTSD symptomology and stuff that you're absorbing, along with suicidal ideation and these sorts of things. How are you doing today?
It's a challenge.
The Patina'd podcast is about the earned wisdom found in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd podcast. Okay, well, welcome to another episode of the Patina'd podcast. So I'm really excited about today's guest, Steven Grayhm. Steven is a filmmaker, actor, director, writer, also runs Team House Studios, which is a film studio that hires veterans. And that's kind of how I became aware of you, which is really, really exciting. And so we'll talk about that. You're also your latest film we want to get into, which is Sheepdog. You know, this thing's racking up awards like crazy. So it's got the Boston Film Festival Best Screenplay Award, and also the latest, which is the Naples International Film Festival, the jury prize for Best Narrative Feature. Did I get all that right?
Yeah. We've been really blessed. Yeah, Boston, it took home Best Screenplay, Best Actress for Virginia Madsen, and Best Supporting Actor for Vondie Curtis Hall. And then, of course, in Naples, the jury award. Well, we'll talk about that. I mean, we want to talk about a surreal experience. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I watched the clip you send of it, and you could see you're very connected in the moment. You're very real and authentic in the moment, and that was awesome to watch. So, yeah, we'll talk about that for sure.
Okay.
I guess generally the way I like to start is I like to kind of, as we get to, I start with, here's the highlight package and why you're listening to the interview. Here's all the credentials, which I just gave. And then I go into what created this man that we're interviewing today. And so I like to kind of, as a therapist, I like to kind of go back into this background of childhood and how you were raised. And then we'll do some psychoanalysis. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure.
But yeah.
All right.
Let's talk about the
child. Do I get a lollipop on the way out the door?
Maybe, yeah. I'll send it to you.
All right. So you want to go with like the origin story of where it all began. So I grew up, I was born in London, Ontario, just north of the border here in Canada. And, funny anecdote that's typically shared is I was born in the same hospital. So London's a rural town. It's a university town, essentially, 2 hours outside of Toronto, Canada. And, I was born in the same hospital as, and it's a small hospital, St. Joe's, as Ryan Gosling and Justin Bieber, Rachel McAdams, and so on. So whatever was in the water, or still is. But, I had a pretty, what is normal? I feel like I spent a lot of time alone. I think that's where the dreaming and the imagination came, in terms of even acting from a very young age. Like I went to Sunday school on Sundays, right? So you're acting out stories from the Bible and playing particular characters, whether you're Noah or Abraham or, and I think that was probably where it all began of like live performance, if you will. And, it's interesting because my mother just reminded me of it a year ago. She brought out this certificate and I had won. She had framed it. I was in the second grade and I had won this like writing competition. And I kind of remember that, but I just remember writing freehand this totally make-believe story of this town and these people and whatnot. So reading it was quite overwhelming, but I think that's where it began. And then the little entrepreneur that I was, around the age of 8, uh, I started to make, I don't know if it's like, they're like clay figurines, right? Where you have a mold and then you kind of let them set and dry, then you paint them and they're
Mm.
cowboys and so on. And I dumped out my backgammon set and put them all in and started knocking on doors, and I would sell them, but then people, like, it would become like a show. So then I would act out the characters, the figurines, and then that
Mm.
became like, oh, do impressions. And I started knocking on doors in the neighborhood, and that's it. I would come home with my backgammon case full of loose change and bills and whatnot, and that was encouraging. So and I think also my childhood, like my grandparents had a farm in Jordan, which is just outside of Niagara Falls, and I think the retreat to the farm every weekend, where you could go off into the vineyard or into the cherry trees, the apple orchard, and you create characters, and that really developed the imaginative side of your mind, and so those were sort of like the early things. And I haven't told this either, but I feel like, when I say like I was kind of a loner, which I was a chubby kid with glasses. I didn't have a lot of friends when I was young. I was, I was picked on a lot. And so I was the kid on the school bus with headphones on, listening to like gangsta rap, or listening
Mm.
to like LL Cool J. And that was like my escape. And all the things that Tretch from Naughty by Nature was talking about, somehow a 10-year-old kid could relate to, of like, of disparity. I don't know. And I know that sounds like such a stretch, but when you're that age and you feel isolated, those be kind of, you know, those artists in your world sort of become your mentors, if you will. Like that
Mhm.
becomes the narrative of the soundtrack to your childhood, you know?
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, you know, rap music as a kid like saved me.
Mm.
It was like therapeutic to hear somebody else's story that maybe wasn't going so well, right? And it was really important to my, I think, to my development, to say the
Mm.
least.
So even just hitting on that for a little bit. So you're dealing with some isolation, which on one end helped with the creativity side of things, helped your brain just be free from being shaped by whatever, and just
Yeah.
allowing your brain just to kind of be creative and come up with, original idea and thinking. But then you have this other piece where, as you're dealing with the bullying and you're feeling this, whatever, this connection or this kinship to the music that you're listening to, that begins to also help shape the worldview. So what is it that helped you connect to the music?
I think that a lot of the music I was listening to it wasn't all like peachy keen. And there were people like in some of the artists I was listening to were talking about, there's this, like, here, I'll just take Naughty by Nature as an example. When you listen to like Uptown Anthem, there's lyrics in there that feels like overcoming adversity. There's like, you know, there's different Naughty by Nature songs where Tretch talks about like basically not wanting to be anybody's problem, or walking on the wrong side of the street. That's how he felt about himself and his self-worth. And then in the end of it all, he finds his way through it, and he somehow, some way, becomes like his own man, and he's like toughened up. And I think that you could take lyrics from like Public Enemy. Like one of my favorite, I used to break dance to Can't Trust It, and that became an anthem for me for years. But it's there's just so much adversity in those lyrics, but there's also overcoming your obstacles. And I think that really helped. I mean, to be fair, there wasn't a lot of music at the time that was doing that. Like, in rock they were singing about you know, long roads, country, landscape, maybe, and that's all beautiful. I listen to some of that stuff too. But I think that when you're talking about grit and angst but importantly, positivity coming out on the other side, I think that's where I really connected to it. And then of course there's the adrenaline rush and the dopamine hit of those beats, right? And those
Hmm.
melodies, right? That really carry you through where, so I always had like headphones on from like, and I was bussed in too. So, I had like a 45-minute bus ride each way. So you would easily go through, potentially an album from loading up your bag at your locker to getting on the bus to getting home and so on. So yeah, and I'm grateful. And I don't think we talk about this enough, but the beauty also of YouTube for many things of like do it yourself projects and just sharing information is like so many of those artists, right? Like have now become sort of like in a very respective way our elders around the campfire. So if you like hear Method Man talking in an interview and he's like
Hmm.
imparting this wisdom and you're like, "Oh my god," like, because you were listening to Wu-Tang when you were a kid and then you see him as now a 50 something year old man and he's imparting this wisdom to the youth and so on. It's incredible, and we see that so much. Like there's a lot of different podcasts like that, like whether it's the barbershop or is it Drink Kings? I hope I got that right.
The
I
way
know
that,
Nori runs it, and
yeah.
I'm sorry if I just like, but I've watched it enough times that like seeing some of my favorite artists go on that show, and it's kind of surreal because you like listened to their lyrics as a kid that shaped in some ways who you are, and then to see them, older, 30 years, whatever, 20 years later, it's pretty surreal. And I love YouTube for that. I love finding like even when you see interviews with Eminem, and the stories that he shares and his own adversity and going through, you know, as a kid. And I know so many kids growing up when Eminem first hit could relate to that,
Hmm.
in a lot of ways. And I think that, like him and other artists, that's why he hit the way he did with the youth and the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point you bringing up, like the current version of this person that you thought you had a feel of from their music and in your childhood, and you hear them now and you can see the experience, the growth, how they've evolved in terms as a human being to, like you said, and like a elder or mentor, that's incredible to see.
I think that like it's what's so interesting also about it is especially when you get a room full of your favorite artists and they're all chatting and they all went through like sort of similar things and then it came out in the music, it you know it transcended as a kid through your headphones, but then just hearing the actual like so many years later where all the gloss, all that's gone and it's just like straight up podcast or whatever it is in an interview and it's much more raw, it's not on the stage, and you hear that and it's actually kind of comforting. And I guess that's why I use the metaphor of like your elders around the campfire, because I'm just so grateful that we have them, that we
Mm.
have we have that shared platform to continue to learn and for other generations, just in terms of like pop culture. I think that that's a pretty wonderful thing and a substantive thing, you know.
Hmm. And so, again, going back to the childhood here, you're dealing with some bullying, and kind of your escape through this isolation and bullying is music. What was going on in terms of a support system, parentally, or even with your grandparents, that was happening for you at this time?
So I was really close with my mother's father. And well, I was close with both of her parents, but unfortunately we lost my mom's mom when I was pretty young. And but I was very close with them. I think what a lot of kids probably experienced that I came up with was that like, your parents are working full time to pay for a lifestyle or to just, just to put food on the table. And so your like community is basically what raises you, right? And we all
Mhm.
know, for the millennial generation anyway, we all know what it's like to like, we see the memes all the time, but it really was that way when the, street lights come on, that means you got to be home for dinner kind of thing.
Yep.
And you'd be exploring on your BMX bikes and, wherever that was, through the neighborhood, climbing school roofs or, going in through, I lived out in a more rural area, but, exploring like, dilapidated farm barns and, that sort of thing. But, which also was part of your development in terms of your imagination and your freedom. And I think that escape was crucial to probably my survival as a kid because I wasn't a part of like the cool kids and I didn't come from, extreme privilege like some of the kids that I had gone to school with. And, you kind of like get in where you fit in, and then you kind of, and you, as you mature, you realize, well, who wants to fit in? You're better to stand out, and be yourself and more importantly, be true to yourself. And I think that that's like a really good segue to the work that I put in to become the artist that I've now become. But just taking you from, say, high school, I was in the drama class, but I felt like a lot of kids didn't take it as seriously as I wanted to take it. And I had a great drama teacher and a shout out to Miss Bush. She was incredible. But I don't think I was there yet. And the other thing too is that it wasn't practical. I never had in my head like, oh, I'll be a professional actor. That just seemed, when you come from a blue collared upbringing, that just seems preposterous. And so, you know, I kind of I focused on my studies. I got an academic scholarship to go to university, and in my first year, I started to get cold feet, of like, oh, this is good, and I'm into it, and I'll work towards going pre med, and and I I had this thought. I was like, well, what if I just totally go out on a limb and audition for theater school and
Mm.
let's just see if I get in. And so I got on a Greyhound bus from Toronto and went to New York and auditioned for all the top theater schools in New York and then a few in London, England. And to my parents' dismay, I told them, if I get into one of them, I'm dropping out.
Mm.
I'm dropping out. And that was really hard for them because nobody in our family lineage had ever attended post-secondary school except my eldest brother. And so I got into all of them, and I was very fortunate.
Mm.
And I went abroad and I studied. I found my voice. I knew it was terrifying, to say the least. It didn't just happen overnight. I mean, you get there and you realize just how untrained you are and the road that you actually have ahead of you. I got to see Mark Rylance do Hamlet on stage at the Globe Theater, and it was breathtaking. If I'm not mistaken, it was like a 3 hour and 45-minute version of it, which is quite long. I think the folio it's like 4 hours and 20, but there was two intermissions, and in the Globe, it's the standing room, right? And I was standing like front row, and I'll never forget, by the end of the final act, where his character, where Hamlet is bleeding out and has been poisoned essentially from the anointed rapier or sword. It was like it was watching a man lose his life on stage and his best friend Horatio like holding him and this, Flights of Angels, Sing Me to Thy Rest, and there wasn't a dry seat in the house. And I'll never forget, I turned behind me and I looked at the entire theater, and just tears. 2 intermissions, 3 hours and 45 minutes. And I remember thinking, I want to be that great, but also like the imposter syndrome of like, how do you even get there? How do you even get there? And so I graduated, I came back to Toronto, and 2 months later, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go all in. And I went to Vancouver, and I was so fortunate because it was a life-changing experience, and that city was so good to me, and I got to really stretch my wings. And I remember going down to the harbor at Granville Island and looking out, and this is the first weekend I'm there, and I was like, I knew there was no going back, and I didn't know anybody in Vancouver. I went out there. I was with the same agency that I'm with today, the talent agency. They had an office out there, and I worked my butt off, and I trained, and I was very fortunate. And 2.5, 3 years into that experience, I had made a short film based on my mother's side, based on my grandparents' experience during World War II. And this short film got into the Hollywood Film Festival, and I was nominated for a Hollywood Film Award. And that's what brought me to LA. And when I went down there, it was just a whole nother, I was in the middle of doing Hamlet in Vancouver on stage. We had to go dark a night so I could fly down to support the film. And who would know that 3 months later, I had an agent. I had a whole team now in Los Angeles. And so, worked through the whole immigration process and lived there 20 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it sounds like early on, like you had this almost burning the boats mentality, where it was, if I land in any of these schools, I'm sorry, parents, to disappoint you, but I'm going this route. And so I'm maybe it's not fully of burning of the boats, because you could have went back to school if you wanted, right? But you're like, no, I'm going after this thing. This is a passion. I'm just throwing it out and seeing if it's going to land, Probably.
Yeah, that's the jump off. Like you gotta take the shot. And I'm telling you, even now, and we'll talk about Sheepdog, it's always terrifying. It's always like, the roadmap can only lead you so far, and you just have to trust your instinct. You have to do your best to surround yourself with people you trust, and that you could lean on. And I think that's definitely a through line in my journey anyway, that when we talk about taking a Greyhound down to New York, like that was scary. It wasn't just like an adventure. It was like, putting yourself out there. And then I think like, training with some of the greats in England and not feeling worthy of it until you are. And that's where the growth comes, and it's like, look, like, when everyone's down at the pub and you can hear them out their window, out at your dorm room window, having the time of your life, and you're pacing in your little tiny dorm room and learning Shakespeare, you have to give yourself to it. You got to put the work into it. But I think also like going to a city like Vancouver that I didn't know anybody in, and I will tell you, in the first couple months, though I loved it's such a beautiful city, but it was hard. It was really hard. And I literally packed up my Honda Accord with what I could fit into it and drove 3 days cross country, and, found a little studio apartment downtown and through a friend, a family donated like a mattress and a box spring with just like, and I put it on the ground, and as I would, and I was waiting tables at the time. I got a job right away, and I just started doing that, and I would slowly buy pieces of furniture. I remember my neighbor, who I'm still very good friends, he's one of my best friends to this day, was my neighbor in that first apartment, and he came in to see it, and he's like, "Man, you don't have anywhere to eat." And I said, no, my table's right there. And I'd put this little tiny table over to my bed, and I would sit on the bed and eat. And he goes, "Oh, let me give you a chair." And he gave me a chair from his own, apartment. So, there's a jump off point for sure. And I think that like even making the move to a place like Hollywood was both surreal and terrifying. But I will say that the years I didn't come to LA getting off a bus with stars in my eyes of like, with the intention or ambition to be famous. I just wanted to work with the best. I just like when I went down for the Hollywood Film Awards, Steven Spielberg's giving a Lifetime Achievement Award to Warren Beatty, and I'm meeting Tom Hanks, over at the cocktail bar, and on the red carpet, I'm meeting Tom Cruise. And it was just sort of eye-opening because these were obviously artists that I had deeply admired, but that I had earned a seat. I made a short film that I literally went all in on with every dollar I had, begged, borrowed, and stealed, and made this beautiful little short film. And that's a very different experience because you can take stock in earning the moment. And that always stayed with me. And it was my North Star, Kenny, in some ways of living life in such a wild place as Los Angeles. And it served me well, from growing up, going to the farm, my childhood. I had a job since I was, 8 years old, and it's cutting lawns, delivering newspapers. Like I never sat idly, and I never cut corners. And I knew that anything in life that was worth doing was not going to be easy, because it never was. And so when you get into that arena, and you see some of your contemporaries that are, some people get lucky, but you see some of your contemporaries that are living certain lifestyles and or not putting in the work, and it's definitely opportunity meets preparation, but you have to sprinkle a little bit of luck in there. And that's definitely the film industry. 100%.
So we have, like, if we're talking about like an athlete, you can have a conception of what putting in the work looks like. If you talk about a musician, you have some sort of conception of what putting in the work looks like. What does putting in the work look like for your type of artistry?
Okay, it's a great question. So I'll start with the acting aspect of it, and then we'll talk about directing and writing. So with acting, I come from the stage, so I like to rehearse. I like to rehearse the heck out of something. Some actors don't like to do that. They're like, "Oh, let's keep it fresh." No, I learned on the stage, you have to be so well prepared that you can create trouble for yourself on stage, right? How does Mark Rylance go out there and deliver a 4-hour play where he's 50% of the dialogue, right? And manage to have grown men, 85 years old, standing behind me in the stalls with tears down their face, performing a 400-year-old play? You think he just winged it? Or he just like, let's keep it fresh? So that's where I came from. So I just, typically, and this is the unfortunate part of the business, but many actors will tell you this, when you get an audition, you usually have less than 48 hours, right? Which is less than ideal. And if you're lucky enough, it's usually not your only audition. You might have multiple in a day. And during a time which was called pilot season, that was a very common thing. So you're literally changing wardrobe in your car, going to the next appointment, getting back into a totally different character, and then going in and doing that. And, as you're trying to race through gridlock. But I knew that I wasn't going to book parts because I looked like Brad Pitt. I was going to book parts because I was going to be the best guy. I was going to be undeniably great. That's what I had to aim for. And, it doesn't always happen. What you think is great is for others might not be. But I found that I was that guy that was up late the moment I got it. I was like, and I would work on the material. I was not the guy that would go in and just wing a cold read or something like that. I would develop the character with the time I had and go in, and I'd always be off book, which is when you have the lines committed to memory. So that's one part of it. And I think that also what it allows you, that if you go in for a director session, you're malleable, right? You can be molded into what the director maybe wants you to try it a different way, be angrier, be happier, a little more nuanced, internalized more, that sort of thing. And it's difficult to do that if you have no idea or don't have a strong understanding of the character or the story that you're there to service, So I think that that's on the acting side of things. And I would go so far as, which will be a segue into writing and directing, which is also studying films and styles of acting. The reason why like Marlon Brando came in and totally flipped the film industry on its head, was because his acting style had not been seen before, where he was very naturalistic and he wasn't aware of the camera, and wasn't playing to the camera, whether that's like looking away or itching his head or kind of throwing a line away and not doing the sort of Clark Gable, professing every line like Gone with the Wind. It was much more internalized, and James Dean did a lot of that kind of stuff, and that really changed, I think, a lot of actors, the style of like how the Pacinos and the De Niros, the Nicholsons, that all the Mickey Rourkes, that all kind of came out of the actor studio. But that's the work ethic part of it. I think for writing, I was reading a lot of people's scripts for years, right? Because that's part of it. You get the audition. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get the script with it, so you have an idea of the whole story you're telling in its full scope. But I think it's understanding like a screenplay is a very technical document, and for a lot of people, it's not necessarily a joy to read, because it's not like a fluid novel. It's a technical document of camera movement, sometimes of interior, exterior, and it's usually done in brevity, so somewhere between say 95 to 120 pages. And so studying those over the years, and then attempting it yourself, and knowing that what the first things you're going to write are probably not going to be great. And even now, like, and all the years experience I have now, understanding it's like trying not to judge your thoughts. Don't edit your thoughts, commit them to a page. So this is important to tie into my childhood. I carried around journals everywhere I went, just blank journals, and I would fill them with stories, things I saw, people I spoke to, and so on. I did the same thing, even on Sheepdog. And though I was meeting with veterans, mental health professionals, Gold Star families, I would fill in these journals. So by the time I got to sit down at a computer and open Final Draft, I wasn't staring at a blank screen. I had all these journals full. So now I have to it's basically put that into this screenwriting program. And I would encourage anyone, if they haven't done it that way, and everyone's approach is different, but it really helps. You don't ever face writer's block because you always have something. And if it's the germ or the seed of the idea, it'll lead somewhere. And honestly, I mean, Matt Damon talks about this in Good Will Hunting, that, the 40-page sort of treatment he put together in his first year of Harvard. He said he thinks one scene of that, even though the character of Will Hunting was created in that writing class, maybe one scene ended up in the final movie, right? And even what the shooting draft was at one point was like a CIA operative will cracks the code for NASA and all this kind of stuff. And it's, you know, and it went through so many different iterations. But the most important thing is if it's not committed to the page, it just lives in your head. And that doesn't do you any service, and it certainly doesn't help the story. I think with like directing, I watched a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but a lot of it was like practical. Being on a set, I was never the actor to go hide in a trailer. I always stayed on set if I was allowed to. And I would just soak it up, and I would, learn, the difference between a grip and a gaffer and a first AC, a second AC, first AD, second AD, third, a TAD. What does that all mean? Different lenses, a focus puller. Then it's like, learning different shots. And then what do those different shots mean? What are they trying to translate, on the screen? And I think that was obviously really helpful. And then you got to get out there and you just got to do it, and that's where I got to, in my career. And I was very fortunate to, to take a whack at it.
Yeah. Even just like the progression of what you're talking about is like, it feels like a lot of this could translate to any other sort of endeavor. It's almost like, okay, like talking about sports or athletes or something is always an easy one. So like you have the athlete and what do? You might have some natural sort of giftings, but you still got to put in the work. You got to put in the time. You got to, learn the fundamentals, so to speak. And then as that progresses, you talk about the from the writer side, it's like the actual, it's more than the studying, it's getting it outside of the head and putting it into practice, right? It's like just taking everything that you're practicing, or taking everything that you've learned up thus far and actually trying to put it into practice.
And I would take it one more step further, Kenny.
Yeah.
You got to take the shot. So if you're talking about the athlete, do you know how many shots Michael Jordan missed?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the courage to take the shot. Everyone's counting on you, and do you have it, or, do you have that courage? And that's the biggest thing. It's muscle memory for sure. That you can train all day, you can do everything you can, but, game 6, do you have it?
Yeah.
Do you have the courage?
Yeah. And it's almost like, so it's like in baseball, the ball's going to find the person who doesn't want it to find them. Like, right. So if you're the person on defense, if you're the
bringing
person
back
on defense,
childhood little league.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's that same sort of thing. And then, as we transition with you within the director part, it's like, now you're studying the ins and the outs, the how it all gets made, right? You're studying the little intricacies, the tiny little details, and putting that all into place to kind of create the whole thing, which is interesting to hear you talk about. Yeah.
And then you got to add in everybody's personalities, cohesive personalities, conflicting personalities. Like you literally have to learn, especially when you're the writer, director, star, producer, you have to learn many languages and know that the buck stops with you. And
so you're the coach, right?
Well, yes, you are. You are for sure. You are the coach. But I think I would take it a step further and also say that, a lot of times a coach isn't going to ask their players what their opinion is. The coach just has the plan. The environment that I like to create is I like everybody's opinion, and everybody's opinion matters to me on my set. And then ultimately, I got to make the call, and then I have to live with that call, whatever that is. But I think that it's important to create that nurturing environment, because this is one of the last sort of professions, or certainly art forms, that's a collaborative experience. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
If you're making a film, you're relying on a village. Like, I think on Sheepdog we employed 356 people, and this is a tiny
Mm.
movie, right? And so I counted on all those people, whether it's crafty, catering, any of my PAs, you know, and I think it's important to have that, because that's the kind of job you want to show up to the next day. But also, like, beautiful things come from that, you know? If your boom op has an idea, and as long as it's not like impeding, your schedule in terms of like trying to make the day and whatnot, you're not standing around for 20 minutes like lamenting on something, that's a gift. Whether you use the idea or not, but they're living that story with you. you know every day you're going to
Mhm.
tell that story, and nobody's there because they don't want it to work. They all want it to work. And I think those were the best sets that, as an actor, that I was on. And I always respected the directors that had a distinct vision, so they would surround themselves with the best people that they could. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was, they made the call and had to live with it, but they always had a vision. And I think that's key to directing.
And so as we kind of transition into, talking about Sheepdog here, but
Mhm.
before we get there, just kind of going in, was White Chicks your first kind of film
No,
thing, like
it wasn't the
that
first,
got
but it was
out?
like, no, it wasn't the first. I had done a bunch of indie films. I mean, the first acting
Okay.
gig, professional, I got, funny enough, coming from the stage, was a David Mamet adapted play called Lake Boat, and it was starring, all the greats that my father knew anyway, like Peter Falk and George Wendt from Cheers, Dennis Leary, David Mamet's brother was in it, Joe Montana directed it. So, and my stuff that I did was in a flashback from, I think, the 50s. It was shot in Toronto. So that was like my foray into like feature film acting and so on. And I will tell you really quickly, I did an episode of Criminal Minds in 2018, and I got to reconnect with Joe Montana, who, by the way,
Mhm.
wrote me a reference letter for theater school. And I'll never forget, and I did bring this up to him. I thanked him because I had emailed, I think it was like his manager at the time, and just put in the request if Mr. Montana could, and I think I had the letter in my parents' mailbox, like, I don't know, less than 2 weeks later.
Mm.
And I said to him how grateful I was that he took me that seriously, and that he nurtured and elevated, So that was my first acting gig. And then, in the early days, I did commercials. I mean, I'm proud to say I was a side street boy, a Backstreet Boy knockoff for, I
Okay.
think, a Bell Canada commercial. I did a commercial for a soda that's I think it was popular in the southern states, Sun Drops. That was a lot of fun. Those were the early days. But White Chicks was the first big film I had done. And I had a recurring on a series before that and so on, but for Showtime. But that was the big one. And I had grown up on In Living Color. And
Me too. Yeah.
yeah, so you could imagine, like, I actually, like, I didn't want to go to the audition, because I didn't think I was funny, but I also was so nervous because Keenan Ivory Wayans was like a great to me, right? And I was like, I don't know, if you're playing in the minor leagues, right? It's like, do you want to go up to bat against Roger Clemens?
Mm.
And I don't know, and it's, maybe that's a wild way to look at it, but I just didn't think I was worthy. I didn't, and my agent at the time was like, no, 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 go in. I mean, you love these guys, and I'm going to embarrass myself. And he's like, that's the idea. Go in there and just be. So I go into this audition, and I just, I had I had bartended, to put myself through college, and I just thought of every cheesy line, all the behavior, the people that you knew clearly were on drugs when they came in. You had to cut them off, or you couldn't serve them, but I was trying to find the fun, the lighter side of that. And and I went in there, and truth be told, at the time, I was in between acting gigs. I was running out of money. I didn't have money for a haircut. So my hair was like, whatever it was going into the room, and I was just free. And I got called back. I was shocked. And I got called back to go in for Keenan. And I really mean this when I say this, but when they say, like, dance like no one's watching, sing like no one's listening, and I did. And I was just so free, and I got it. And I would tell you, showing up to set on the first day, I was a basket case, and I I wanted to get in my car and like flee, because I was like, oh my god, this is real. I can't, because you got to remember, like, you're surrounded with Sean and Marlon, and then there's Terry Crews, who had done Friday, and you're like, this is gonna be bad news bears, man. This is gonna be so bad for me, right? And they're gonna have to recast me. And and I remember one of the first scenes I think we did was, I'm looking across the room and I'm supposed to see, I think, the Wayans brothers, and I was so nervous that I said it a certain way, and Keenan came over. He knew I was nervous, and he goes, "Just do what you did in your audition." And he's like, "I want you to go as big as you feel like you need to go, and I'm going to be here to pull you back." And it was this look in his eyes, and I was like, all right, here we go. And that was it. And I stayed in that character for 4 months. I don't think anybody on that set ever called me Steven. I remember Sean always going, "Potty boy, hey, potty boy." I was always referred to as Party Boy. But yeah, I stayed in that character. I was so terrified of not being funny that I thought if I lost it, I would never get it back. It was a long shoot, but I was very blessed and very, very grateful to work with such comedy genius, and just seeing where everyone's careers have gone too. Like Terry Crews, man. I've got so much love for him. He was just so kind to my family, and just such a gentleman. And you know, we know. I don't think anyone knew how big it was going to be, and then obviously how it became sort of like almost like, I know it did well at the box office, but like almost like a cult classic, because it was rediscovered on DVD, then it was discovered on streaming with different generations. But I don't think, like, I remember Brittany Daniel turning to me in one of the nightclub scenes, and she was like, "We are so lucky right now. We are so lucky." And this is right before the dance-off scene. And we all felt it. There was all gratitude, right? That we were going to be a part of something really special and funny, and that was not going to pull any punches, But I don't think anyone knew, like, just how far of, like, how much people love that movie and love the characters. And, it's worth sharing that over the years, the people that have approached me, from cancer survivors to people that were in a dark place and had just shared how much that film uplifted them in their darkest hour. And I'm telling you that, the power of laughter. I mean, laughter truly is the best medicine. And I'll always be grateful for that experience. As ridiculous as my character was,
Yeah, that's what a cool experience. And to be able to be, like you said, with these icons and these people that you looked up to, watching, like who our age didn't watch in living color and just like try to mimic, Fire Marshal Bill or whatever, and like just like be enthralled by
for sure.
it.
I was doing all those. I have home video, and I'm not doing it for you now, but my Wanda is pretty bang on. You get me the right wig. You know, Fire Marshal Bill's up there for sure. I mean, it was just, I mean, it was just so iconic, and I wish they would bring that show back in some sort of incarnation for this generation. I mean, it was just so free, and they really went for it. I mean, it was brilliant. Like people don't really realize, like, comedy is really hard. Like it's the hardest I mean, I've done, like, emotionally, like Sheepdog, like, aged me. There's no question. Like it and we'll get to that, but but comedy, like being funny at 6 o'clock in the morning in front of 300 extras, right? And I think that, like, what behooved me, if you will, is that I was like, don't play the bump, just commit. It's like situational comedy. It's only funny because we're convicted, right? We have conviction
Mm,
in what we're doing, and that's what makes it funny, you
mm,
know? And so that's what I did. I just, and just hoped it worked. And then, I was given the room to play, and to riff and to improvise here and there and try different things to see if they'd work. And that's all you can really ask for, you know?
Well, let's get into Sheepdog. We've been kind of teasing
Yeah.
this through the interview, and I want
Yeah.
to talk to you about it. So, because I've done my research, on you before
Mhm.
this, and as I always do with my guest, and I'm fascinated by the grit it took to get it made in the first place, and just kind of, obviously, being a combat veteran myself, like, for me, I can't watch modern war movies, right? Like, I can't, and the scenes are too realistic. Like, I can watch Saving Private Ryan, love
Mhm.
it, like, amazing story, everything, love everything about it, but I can't watch modern combat related movies. But that being said, like, I appreciate when they're being done in a way that is meant to honor the true experience, and not to, I guess film is film, so you might need to overindulge on some things, or make it big in some ways, but just to be true to the experience of the veteran, right? And it's in my research of this, sounds like that was your heart within the entire experience of making this. So yeah, let's just have you kind of talk about the experience of all that.
Sure. So Sheepdog is the most important thing outside of creating my son that I've ever done. And if it's the last thing I do, I can walk away. I can live. It was a 13-year journey that was hard fought. And man, the obstacles that the industry put in front of us, and the emotional toil and so on. But I'm left with gratitude, and I'll tell you why. Because I was trusted by the veteran community, by the military community, by mental health workers, first responders, and and that's a huge honor, but it's also a great responsibility. So in 2010, my car broke down north of LA, and I was doing a movie up in Vancouver, and it's 3 hours from the city. It was kind of odd that it broke down because it was a newer car, but this is part of the serendipity here.
Mm,
And I called AAA, and they sent the local tow company. Get in the car, and the driver's just like, "Hey, buckle up, partner. We got a long haul into the city." And like 20 minutes into the drive, it's just pure silence. I'm exhausted from driving through the night from Vancouver, and I'm kind of nodding off. And he just starts talking, and he just started opening up about everything that was going wrong in his marriage, and the financial stress he was experiencing as a father of 3 young children. And then he went further and started to talk about all the different medications that he was on. And then he started to
mm,
talk about recently getting out of the military, and went into his different deployments, And it was pretty heavy, you know. And I think for 3 hours on that drive, I might have said 5 words. I just listened, you know. We got to LA, and I hugged him, and I thanked him, you know, for saving my butt and everything. And I said, you know, if you ever need to chat or want to go for a beer or something, I'm here. And I could see in his eyes that like I was probably never going to hear from him. But that experience alone in his truck, to have someone just listen without prejudice, and the freedom that comes with maybe never seeing you again to ever be judged, and how much that meant. So for the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about him, and what he had gone through, and my God, like I was rooting for him. And so I thought, well, there must be more people like him out there. Surely there is. And so again, going back to childhood, I started to write in my journal, and I started to like kind of create a character almost. And I think it was part therapeutic for me, for all the things that were shared to me in the cab of that tow truck. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go on a nationwide road trip, and I'm just going to meet with veterans, anyone that'll speak with me, and get to the bottom of this. Like, why is he on all these medications? Why is it a 3-hour wait time to get, you know, an appointment at the VA? Or why are people like him falling through the cracks? And who's there? He's living out in rural California. Like, where's his tribe? You know, the guys he served with, they're all displaced, if they're still living, all across the country. And so I got this cork board, and I put it up on my wall in my apartment in Hollywood. I put a map of the country up, and I just started emailing. I went on Facebook groups. I was just, and just know, like in the beginning, nobody wanted to speak. It was just like, Hollywood, no way. And it turns out that a veteran in South Texas was willing to at least meet, and he was going to kind of like suss us out. And when I say us, when in the beginning, the early days of setting up that road trip, I was doing a low budget Western where I met Matt Dallas on. I was the outlaw and he was the law. And we were actually shooting at the Paramount Ranch, which is unfortunately burned down on one of the wildfires, I think 10 years ago. But Matt and I became fast friends, and I saw the beauty in Matt's pain, because he had shared some of his own personal journey, which really touched me. And what was remarkable was Matt would smile through the pain. And it was a beautiful thing. It was a thing that I don't have as a person. And it's such a remarkable quality. And I looked at him, and I in some ways reminded me of the tow truck driver. In some ways, you know, I was like, wow, I think he would be the perfect best friend for this film. So I pitched him my road trip, and I said, like, I have this role, this idea of a story right now, but the caveat is you have to join me on the road this summer, and you have to see it for yourself. And we commit to it, and we go to every nook and cranny of the country where anyone will have us, and sit, break bread, and just listen. And he agreed to that. And we got to South Texas, to McAllen, Texas. We met Staff Sergeant George Rice. It was a little bumpy in the beginning. You know, he shared a bit of his service in the Army. And, you know, we were so naive. I remember I had a camera thinking, I got to document this just so if I ever write, I got, you know, and you know, who's really going to open up to you in that format? And I remember shutting off the camera to break for lunch, and he like pulled me aside, and he's like, "You're the writer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he opened up to me about this military operation that had kind of gone sideways, and that they had lost 3 of their guys. And he said, "Listen, I have some guys on the East Coast I think you should meet with. I don't know that they would talk to you, but I like you, and I'll take a chance." And he gave me an in memoriam band that he had on his arm that had the names of those 3 fallen soldiers. And he was like, "Don't let me down." And we got in the car, Matt and I, And I knew in that moment, in that moment anyway, I felt like I'd bit off more than I could chew. I said, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do that's ever going to pay honor or respect to Mr. Rice or the guys he served with. And we're in deep now, and this is like the first stop on the road trip. And I remember that feeling of like, you go back and you retreat, or you commit to this now, but you see it all the way through, whatever that means. And I remember in that car, Matt and I were like, well, complete the mission or die trying. And I really mean that. Like, we are here today with a film that'll come out later this year that I'm so deeply proud of because of that mentality, because we genuinely believed in our mission. And from that experience on, you know, I went to Maine. I met with specialist Nick Carbonell, who had served in the same unit. Again, eye-opening, you know, and then all of a sudden it was just like, you know, doors started to open. More people welcomed us into their homes. People that were not related in any way, in any fashion to George's service, you know, going to the military, you know, the Paralympics, all these different, you know, meeting with VSOs, and that was all through that first road trip, and meeting Gold Star families. You know, I attended that same year a White House event with a Gold Star mother who actually appears in Sheepdog, and she spoke at my wedding, Beniva Jacquet, and I fully immersed myself in it, but I was willing to die for it. And that's what makes this journey extraordinary. And I know that's a heavy thing to say, but it's taken me some time to step away from the project to even process what these 13 years look like. Because it wasn't like I took my foot off the gas and was like, oh, I'm going to go shoot this movie and do this and do that. I did do other projects, but this was always on my shoulder. This was always sort of like haunting me, because I carried this massive weight of all these folks that had shared the most intimate details of combat or trauma, and I felt that I owed them to at least see it through. You know, when someone tells you the intimate details of hand-to-hand combat that's so violent in the garage of their house in rural Minnesota, and then you step away and you go back to the barbecue where all the friends and family are, and you're like everything's in slow motion, and you look at your Marine veteran now, this connection, and you feel like your brothers, your family, and they're picking up their daughter and putting her on their knee, and you're just trying to hold it together because you're like, I don't even, like, that level of strength most people couldn't stand, you know. And then what comes with that, and what comes with that, and the challenges that come with that. So those folks were always near and dear, but always in my mind. And that was kind of the driving force, right? I think that, you know, Kenny, to be fair, I think that they would have let me off the hook if I said 5 years into it, like, hey, I'm getting, you know, I just can't, we've tried everything. It's just not working. It's not, you know, we have a beautiful script. Nobody, you know, movie making is unpredictable. It's very expensive. They would have let me off the hook, but we weren't willing to let ourselves off the hook. And that's something that I've now come to terms with. You know, when you get out to, you bump into people that you might have met on year 1 or year 2 or year 3, and you're in year 9 or year 7, they're like, oh, you're still doing that thing? And you're like, yep, we're close. You know, and there were so many false starts along the way, and I'm happy to get into that too. But that was sort of like, that was the genesis of it all. And to be fair, for anyone that's listening that, you know, is a filmmaker or looking to get into this sort of industry, we didn't know it was going to take 13 years. You don't know. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? But we knew we were never going to quit. And you got to be careful with that mentality too, because it can cost you a lot, you know. And I'm just so grateful and proud that it was worth it. And if I had to do it all over again, despite the heartache, despite the struggle, the pain, the anger, the frustration, rejection, I would do it all over again. It was a worthy journey, and it continues to be.
Can you tell me about this sort of hard line being refusing to quit? As you said, like the people, you know, probably would have let you off the hook 5 years in, but you said no, like I forget the words you said, but we're going to fully commit or die trying.
I said commit, complete the mission or die trying.
Yeah. And so on the other end of that, your warning was, well, you can lose a lot in the process with that type, with that level of commitment. Can you talk about first the mentality, or how you're able to keep that mentality, that commitment to it, and then if there were losses along the way and what those look like?
So I'll speak to the mentality first. If I was making a romantic comedy, you know, I'm not a quitter. I don't think I've ever quit on anything I've done. I've pivoted to go, hey, if something's not working, let's try this version of it, right? Or do, you know, and I think that that's important in life, like find the pivot, you know, and then we can relate that to filmmaking later. But in any, like, find the solution. What's the pivot? But I think that the mentality was that when you're carrying the responsibility of so many people's stories they haven't even shared with their spouse or their clinician, or maybe they haven't even gone to the VA, or maybe they haven't ever spoken these words out loud of what they were going through, and someone's trusted you with that story, there's a great responsibility, as I've said. And I think that becomes your sort of driving factor of like, well, if they went through that and they sacrificed that, or this Gold Star mother lost her son in a foreign country, you know, was killed in a horrific way in a sheep pen, and she's got to wake up every morning and put that smile on for, you know, her colleagues at work, or for family, for friends that come over to visit, pay their respects. And she's been doing that for years. We'll get through this. We're going to get through this. We keep pushing on. But if you want to talk about the losses, and understand to people listening, they might seem immaterial, but when you're going through it, it's everything, right? You don't, you know, because there's no blueprint to it, right? So you're just kind of dealing with it as it comes. But yeah, 2 years into the journey, I lost my manager of 10 years. You know, it was the longest relationship outside of my own direct family that I ever had. It's why I came to LA, and a big issue was that I was putting too much time into the project, you know, and I understood it's a business, you know, and he had worked so hard for me in those 10 years, and I'll always be grateful. But that was hard, right? Because you're like, okay, and then you're like, you know, and when you're given an ultimatum to basically kind of not continue on the path you're on and go back to doing things, you know, whether it's going back into the room to audition full time every day of the week, and not, you know, say fly out to Pittsburgh to meet with a veteran, you know. And it's not like I totally took a break, walked away from acting, but I had made my priority the project, and trying to get it off the ground. So that's kind of like, that was the first thing. But what you're not prepared for, and what I was not prepared for, was that, you know, the things that are shared with you, I didn't know that they were going to creep into your life in a way of like creeping into your dreams, where you start living somebody else's nightmare. And you don't know how to handle that because you're not equipped to. And I don't have a medical background, in the sense of like, you know, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a trained therapist. I studied those things, but in terms of like being prepared to take that kind of stuff in. And I mean, I got to a place in the first 2 years of it I couldn't be in a loud restaurant. I definitely could not have my back to the door anywhere. To this day, I can't sit in a place where my back is to the door. You're always looking at people's hands, who's coming, who's going, and you start to feel well, you start to realize that you've begun to isolate yourself, right? And I started to realize there was a small group of friends, and we all keep in touch, but we had a small group of friends in LA, and where you go to dinner, and you're not necessarily a joy to be around, not because you're an a-hole or something like that, but just because you're so locked into whatever it is you're going through, right? That you shut off to everybody. So there's only so many times that people are going to go, "Hey man, you okay?" Or people check in with, yeah, I'm great, brother. I'm great. I'm doing good, So I found that was the beginnings of it. I just, in the moment, I didn't really know why, and I hadn't connected the dots that, oh, this thing over here. But so then you start to try to, I guess in some ways, Kenny, you try to numb that, right? And then you start to have and this is the part you got to be careful about. You start to have suicidal ideations, and you're your self-worth, and then your trauma from childhood, and all these things start to surface, right? That you were never equipped to ever handle. And you don't have anyone. You're living in Hollywood, and I found that I was really lucky, because on our second road trip in 2013, I met my future wife, and I was speaking at an event where I am right now in Western Massachusetts, and we were invited to speak at this veterans event, and both of her brothers are combat veterans, and I think that having that level of support, we started to date and so on, but she understood as a civilian what I, as a civilian, was going through, because she also knew, having brothers that served in Afghanistan and Iraq, she had seen, albeit a different version of someone, who actually has been in combat and has come home with, different things challenges that they have to deal with. And I was very fortunate, for that, because that was 3 years into the journey, So, I was lucky, and I don't want to sound, oh, woe is me, but man, it got close. It got really close to not being here. And that's a really scary thing. And I think that my empathy is so deep and devout to those that are out there that are struggling, because I've been there. And that's why there's a line in Sheepdog that says, Von D. Curtis Hall says that our pain is relative, from the cosmonaut who's breached the unknown to the warrior on the battlefield. He says sometimes we got to fall apart to find ourselves all over again. And every word I wrote on that page came from this incredible experience. And that's why it's my hope. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart, that if we're, able to save a single life with this film, it'll be the greatest Hollywood success story. And I think we have the power to do that. But, I mean, look, anything that's worth doing, it's not easy. And I understand that the story doesn't end this way 99.9% of the time, especially with writing a screenplay that you spent years nurturing and developing and getting it right. And, there's just so many different things, and there's so many, to get to that place. And, you can have all the perseverance in the world, and, it doesn't work out, or you get to set and and you make it and it's not great. And, and so to be at a place where you're talking, at the beginning of this podcast about winning awards and, being on the festival circuit, and for us, just seeing the incredible emotional and the positive impact that it's continuing to make from all generations of veterans, active duty that have come, civilians, mental health professionals, first responders. It's been a blessing, and it's like, man, do I thank God that we stayed the course and we fought the fight, and yeah, I'd say to people also that are listening that, it's tough when people ask me like advice about filmmaking, and it's hard because like the curtain was pulled back. I met the wizard, and I think that component of what a difficult industry that it is, because it's predatory. It can be, everybody has motives, and it's really challenging. Like, we talked about childhood at the beginning of this, but you know, the temptations that people can dangle, if you do this, I'll do that for you, or it's wild, and it happens to the best of them. And I think that was one of the hardest things for us, is that we weren't willing to be compromised. We were definitely not for sale. And I think that was why this took as long as it did. I mean, I'd be honest to say that probably the first draft I wrote was probably not great. It was good. It was better than a lot of stuff I think that I was reading that was coming my way. But I'm a perfectionist by nature. I have OCD, so I'm always like, I'll make this better. I can, and I kept refining it. But there was many times that we sat in rooms, and promises were made, and then you're like, oh, that was the long game. That's what they wanted out of this, or and it's incredibly discouraging. And then it just takes one phone call from one of your veteran brothers, or Gold Star mother, that just comes in and just says the right thing to put the wind back in your sails. You're like, no, once more into the breach we go. And that's been this journey.
Yeah, that's it's wild that you absorbed so much of the characteristics of the veterans that you were studying, and including never having your back to a door, and all these types of kind of traditional type PTSD symptomology and stuff that you're absorbing, along with suicidal ideation and these sorts of things. How are you doing today?
It's a challenge. I think that it's hard for me to watch myself on screen as it is, but I don't see myself. And it's hard to watch the trauma in my eyes that surfaced. And I think that's one aspect of it, because it was captured, and it was sort of lightning in a bottle of all that happened, what led up to it, all the pressure, not having money to throw at any single problem, and go, and just having to trust the words I put on the page to, I didn't overthink anything. I just, making the movie, just completely relied on instinct. But in my own personal life, yeah, it's challenging. I've done some therapy, I think, but I'm also fortunate too that I've inherited this family, this veteran family that we all check in on each other, and and I have unfortunately lost guys along the way that broke my heart, and that we all did everything that we could to keep them with us. And but I am grateful for that, and I do find that support is important. And again, anyone listening, checking in with somebody is such an easy thing to do. and it does carry a lot of weight. And one thing that I had sort of adopted from the veteran community is just how often veterans say to each other, like, okay, love you, brother, or love you, you know because it could be the last time that you speak to each other. And I think with our our the veteran suicide epidemic, I think that is something that everybody takes, obviously very seriously, but something that we always say to each other. And so, I'm Kenny, I'm fortunate, and I'm thinking about, though, the person who's isolated from the world, but also from the experience and the camaraderie and the brotherhood that they had, and that they cherished in while serving, that they no longer have. And there's a line in the film, where Vondi Curtis Hall, again, he says, I'm not talking about friendship, I'm talking about brotherhood, and finding your tribe, because it takes a village. You cannot do it on your own, and that's okay. You don't have to do it on your own, you know and I there's a lot of talk sometimes out there about, like, I get it, like, talking about your negative feelings, or your pain, or your suffering. It's almost like you're bringing that to the surface, and then you're reliving it, and there is some truth to that, right? I'm somebody that my imagination and my memory is so vivid. I could think about something 30 years ago when I was like a little kid, and it's like fresh today. It's like I'm going through it for the first time or the second time, you know so you do have to be careful about that. But if you're always in a constant conversation with yourself, and you start listening to the whispers that get louder, you're setting yourself up. And you gotta, like, there's no harm, and there's nothing weak about taking the help, or being vocal about your experience, and finding that help, or whether it's a professional, whether it's a colleague or a friend or someone you trust. It's like the most important thing, and this is the most important message of the film, of Sheepdog, is our suffering need not destroy us. you know if you've suffered loss, with loss comes pain, and with pain comes anger, but with the anger comes the grit to overcome any obstacle. And that's why the focus of the film looks at post-traumatic growth, PTG. It's like not living, and I have a lot of wonderful friends and colleagues at the VA, and I love them, and I'm so grateful, and they've inspired so much of this film. And I know the system's broken, and I know that there's wonderful people there that show up every day, that are saving lives and making a positive impact on people's lives. But the system is only interested in getting you from -5 to 0. And the idea is, like, what about living your life at a net positive, at like +5, and harnessing your pain and turning that into grit, and overcoming those obstacles, and taking those chances in life, that might seem scary, that new job, that new friendship, that new therapist, that, you know, and looking at that, and look, I'm not obtuse. I know it's easier said than it is done. And that's the challenge. But I do think that there is a path. I do think that there is hope, and I do think it's worth hanging on. And I'm living proof of that.
Mm-hmm. I there's so much about your like spirit that reminds me of my mentor, Leif Carlson. And
Wow.
so he was not a veteran himself. He was my therapist at the VA. And so when I first got out, and addiction ran rampant in my life, and then I finally started getting help for it, long story short, it was Leif who was running a dual diagnosis group for combat veterans with addiction. I'm a real small group, like 5 or 6 of us in this group. And it was him in the check-in of this group that I was pointing at. And blaming and basically saying, you know, like, you guys around the group are talking about this thing sobriety. I don't know what that means, but I know I can get 3 days clean, and today's day 3, and guess where I'm going, and there's nothing I can do to stop me. And it's your fault. And I pointed at Leaf, it's your fault. You know, like, you guys have a 6-month waiting list to get treatment. Here I am willing to get treatment. And he then pulled me aside after that group. He said, "Are you serious?" Essentially. I said, "Yeah." And he pulled some strings, and I was in treatment that weekend. And you know, we're coming up in 2 days is 18 years for me of sobriety.
Oh, brother.
Because of
Wow.
that, right?
Good
And
for you. Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I only share that to say that group, that group that I started in, where there's like 5 or 6 of us, grew to be this big group of 20 plus people every
phenomenal.
week. And people ranging from my era of war all the way to Korean War veterans, like large group of us going each week and checking in. And Leaf was the one who ran the group. And here he is, a civilian running a group of combat vets, and he holds the highest respect amongst anybody in that group. He's the guy that we all looked to as our leader, as our facilitator and our leader, and all. And he earned it by doing exactly what you've done in this process of being like, I'm here, I'm willing to sit, I'm not willing to tear you down. I'm also like he had courage to call us out on stuff when we listened. You know, when we would get too much in our stuff and get woe is me, and he'd be like, "What are you doing?" Like, you know, he's like, pour me another drink. Like, you know, come on, let's go. Like, what can you do? What actions can you take? You know, and he had this, you know, we all really respected him. It was him. One of his lessons was teaching a group of combat veterans to surrender to win. You know, to surrender to win, to surrender. And the paradox there is to win as a result of the surrender. That was a hard group for him. It was the one time I've ever heard people like really give him a lot of trouble, and it was a hard day. And by the end of that group, it was profound for everybody. Like the paradox just hit home for so many people. But I say all that to say,
amazing.
Yeah. I say all that to say, you seem to have the same spirit about you, where the first thing you said before we hit record here is like, I just want you to know I'm a civilian. I didn't serve. And I knew that already because I was doing my research on you. But you know, you come through with this humility of like, you know, don't confuse me here. I didn't do it, but you did the work so much to represent us combat veterans that you're dealing with the consequences from a mental health perspective as a result. And that says a lot. Not saying that everybody, not saying that that's the standard for helping veterans is to go as far as you have, but there's a lot of merit to that. And I think the other thing is too, and like, I want to say this because, like I said, I've been in sobriety for 18 years now, coming up on 18 years in 2 days. And so, like, there's a role within the rooms of 12-step community that is the sponsor. And the sponsor is to listen to the trash that the sponsee is unwilling to share with anybody, not a spouse, not a therapist, nobody. And for some reason, the sponsor gets this gift to be able to hear it and soak it in. And I don't know what the percentage is. I don't think there's any research on this. I mean, it is anonymous, but like, I would say 10%, if I'm being generous, of those sponsors are worth their weight in gold. The other 90% will do what the rest of society will do, which is I'll hear your pain. And while I'm feeling it for a while, I'll be there for you. And then the check-ins, the continuing to go through it with them dies off relatively quickly. It's not a long-term thing.
Right.
But what you've done is I think as I heard you talking about, the mentality it takes to walk this project of 13 years through, I don't think you're giving yourself, and sure, it's humility and credit in that, but I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit in the sense of you continued to walk it through to the end. That doesn't, it's such a small percentage of people who are willing to actually do that. And so where you're saying the way I was able to do it was carry this weight on my shoulders of the people who demanded the best out of me and expected this project to go through. I don't, there's something more that you have to do it, because that's not a lot,
appreciate you
right?
saying that. Yeah. I think that I didn't, there doesn't need to be a reward for the journey, but I will tell you that the payoff is standing in the aisle of a theater as the credits are coming up, and a Vietnam veteran is in my arms in tears and whispering in my ear, "Thank you." Or meeting an OIF or OAF vet who says, I've never seen anything like this. Now my family can understand why I am the way I am, and my God, I hope my ex-wife watches this. Like that. That's everything. Meeting young mental health workers in Florida who, from the National Association of Social Workers, who are all, in their early studies, and they're like, oh my God, this is, when we train, this is exactly what we're going through, whether it's learning, different techniques like EMDR and so on. And so, or meeting Gold Star families that have lost a loved one in combat, and how much it's touched them. And then there's the civilians that had no idea, that have never met a veteran or didn't have a veteran in their family, or maybe they did. And they're like, oh, I understand why, my uncle, because the movie is not a PTSD movie. It's a PTG movie. Like, it deals with some of those, I would say, themes, but it goes into, I wanted to provide hope, but realistic hope that is focused on this incredible journey of this regular person that I portray, this combat veteran who comes from a working class family, works at a paper mill that's being shut down, jobs going elsewhere, estranged from his wife, honorably discharged, decorated, isolated, and the story shows, it's an ensemble piece, shows. I do want to come back to one thing though that's important, that I think for people listening, that, Kenny, what would have happened? You don't have a crystal ball, but if Leaf didn't pull any strings, like that, like you're one of the lucky ones, and I know you know that.
Yeah.
But like that, because it's such a beautiful thing, and it changed your life, but I would venture to say it saved your life.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So what do we do when we don't have the guy that can pull the strings? And I think that's the challenge in our communities right now. Like, our interconnectedness, and how paramount it is that nobody falls through the cracks. I just, too many stories I know of veterans, that have waiting out in their car for hours trying to get that appointment, or oh, sorry, TRICARE doesn't cover this, it covers that, and you can't get in, or you're trying to even do an outpatient facility, no room for you there. Oh, well, I don't want to go over to that facility, it looks like the cuckoo's nest, and I'm already terrified, I'm looking for any reason to say no. And I think that part of what I hope would have happened if Kenny could, or if Leaf couldn't pull the strings, is I would hope that in that community, in your own community, there would have been people there, whoever they were, whether they're family or not, to encourage you to stay curious, stay the course, to find that help. Right? Because I think what you said is so valid, which is like, I'm ready now. Like, call me. You know how many veterans that I know that were ready, or that I was like the last phone call, and I'm trying to call different facilities around the country and trying to, and you lose your nerve real quick, right? It's terrifying. And it's all part of the journey, and it's normal to lose your nerve. What you went through, though, is abnormal. And I think that if I could say anything today, I think that that's what I'm most focused on now with promoting this film and putting it out there later this year, is unifying us on this. Like, people don't realize like what it takes to be put in harm's way where you're playing the ultimate extreme sport. It's not laser tag, because when you get hit, and I think that the way it's depicted sometimes in film is it's just pure bravado, or that human element, and I think that why that human element is so important is that it allows civilians like myself, or like people in your community, to understand better, to truly empathize, not feel sorry for you. You served your country honorably, you had the courage to do it, but to be available, to be there, to support, to help, to even if you don't want the help, just to listen, and I think that that's a huge component. So I'm so grateful that that you had that experience, and that Leaf was there. And then, like, and more importantly, man, anyone that knows, and 18 years of sobriety is incredible. So congratulations.
Yeah,
good for you. And I'm sure right now, I'm sure people listening, when this goes out, will be so inspired by that, and continue to be inspired, man. But good for you. That's no short feat.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So as we let's see, as we kind of move along in the conversation here, like I think I'm do you have a date yet when Sheepdog is coming out? Like, when is this happening?
We've been talking internally. We're with our distributor. It's really difficult. We have the trailers cut. It's beautiful. I'm eager, but everything's timing. When you're a small film like ours, you have to be very strategic in how you do this. But I can safely say it would be in late summer, early September. This is when, yeah.
I mean, I think it'll probably be the first like modern combat related or veteran related movie that I'd be willing to watch here. So I'm excited for it to come out when it's actually ready to come out. Just kind of hearing your heart behind it. I'm like, okay, I'll check it out.
I'm honored, man. And I'll tell you, you might not have to wait as long as it coming out in theaters. If we happen to screen at any festivals on the West Coast, I'll keep you posted. I think that the plan currently is we're going to continue with the film festival circuit across the country, and continue to build our veteran service organization coalition and corporate sponsorship and all that, because we need that support for such a small film, and continue to hit that drum. And we're doing campus tour as well across the country. So I'll certainly keep you posted, and I'd love to have you as my guest. That we'll try to hopefully get into one close to you and in Northern California.
That'd be an honor. Yeah, that'd be amazing. So yeah, keep me in mind. So you're a first time father?
I am. Yeah.
All right. So so welcome to a life beyond measure. That's amazing, man. That's amazing. So yeah, so let's you said Sheepdog was one of the two greatest things you've ever created,
Yeah.
and is it a son? Your son?
Yes.
Or-
Yes, my son River, he's a gift. Everything that any of my friends that are parents have ever said is 100% true about the journey, about the joy, the lack of sleep, but it's a miracle. And I'm telling you, it's pretty wonderful. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that he's happy, he's healthy, and and man, he's a handsome little devil. So he's, we got really lucky, and my wife is strong and resilient, and she's an amazing mother, and we're really lucky, and we're just finding our, as you do, your footing through it all. And we left Los Angeles anyway for the time being. I'd been there for 21 years and the same sort of quarter-mile radius, which is wild. And my wife had been there for about 10, 11 years. So yeah, we're just trying to figure out what does the next chapter look like. I'm obviously on the campaign trail with the film and promoting it, and my commitments are are pretty hefty. So it's wonderful to have the support and be surrounded by family. So we count our blessings across the board, man.
Yeah. How does that look like? I know you said for you being raised, it was kind of, like parents were working to try to create a lifestyle, put food on the table, whatever. Parents working often. How does that look like for you in your role, and even kind of if you were to try to think about it going forward, directing another film in the future and acting and all of that, trying to, I guess, conceptualize balance of being a present father versus,
Right.
active in your career?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance. I think that it's like, when you're, I don't know, I mean, pick any name actor that's out there. I mean, if you can afford, have a different kind of structure, whether it's nannies, or you can write into your contract that I will not do it unless I have, my wife and kids with me and stuff like that. Yeah, not at that level. So it's a balance, but look, we're going to figure it out. And I look at what both of my brother-in-laws went through when they were deployed. Just as recently as 2016, my brother-in-law Jason was deployed, I think, for 9 months to Afghanistan, and we were on pins and needles. So like, I look at what they went through and what our family went through then, and what I'm doing, nothing in comparison. So it's a balance, and you have to make yourself available, and you have to make decisions, because family first. So you have to make those decisions. I mean, my wife and my son and my mother-in-law came actually to our Texas premiere back in November at Round Top. So we were all together. It's and it was amazing. It's tricky, right? But it was great. So there'll probably be some more of that in the future, and that's good also for me to have that support. It's really important, because when I go on the road right now, I know my wife is surrounded and has the support and love that she needs, and our dogs, and where we are. And we weren't going to have that in Los Angeles. When you're walking your dogs in the morning and you're dodging, broken glass, or, a dirty needle, or, I'm being serious. I mean, it was, when you live in Hollywood. And so we weren't going to do that with a baby strapped to my wife's body, or a stroller and two dogs. And so we're very fortunate right now that we have this level of support, and we'll make it work, and I think that my wife has a dog in this fight too, because of the sacrifice of her brothers. And so we'll come together as a family, and we'll make it work.
Yeah. And so as of now, with Team House Studios, no irons in the fire.
Oh no, there are.
There are. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So I'll tell you. So over COVID, when we were all on lockdown, especially in LA, boy, they shut that place down. You couldn't even step outside of your house for a while. Well, what do you do when everything shut down, right? So this is pre
Mm.
Sheepdog. So Sheepdog was written, and I was like,
Mhm.
refining and this and that, but it was written. And I was like, well, the police department's not shut down, right? They might have defunded it, but it's not shut down. And so I went down to Newton Station through one of my veteran brothers who's an undercover LAPD detective. He was so kind to trust me to make a contact at Newton Station, and I began writing a heist script. And it took on this life of hell or high water, because it partly takes place in LA, partly takes place in West Texas. It's like hell or high water meets Heat, but it's really about two families. And I'm really excited about it. I'm really proud of it. I think that it's a really great story, and I'm looking at shooting that definitely in Texas, and hoping to sort of start pre-production and raising the financing and so on for that this year, to potentially go to camera at the end of this year, early 2026.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like it would almost sounds like it might be a just fun change in terms of theme. Just a fun film to shoot.
Yeah, I think it'll be a massive endeavor, obviously, because you're dealing with action and so on, and it's bigger in scale and whatnot. But there's a lot of heart in the story, and my hope is to expand the veteran initiative that I started at Team House Studios. So on my first film, that was like, almost like a student film, but we got worldwide distribution, which was pretty incredible, called The Secret of Cinchony. I was able to hire 10 military veterans, and one Gold Star family member. Sheepdog expanded it, 17 military veterans, 5 Gold Star family members. So we all know that Texas, I believe, is home to the largest population of veterans in the country. So I hope to expand our team greatly and bring some wonderful people together, and give them an experience that they can cherish for the rest of their life, that might feel slightly familiar to the best parts of their service, which might be the camaraderie and maybe bunking up with your team or your squad, and just being around people you admire and hardworking people, and then having this thing where you capture it in a moment in time that you can all be sort of proud to be a part of. So that's my hope. Working hard on it. Putting all those assets together currently.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, that sounds fun.
You coming down? You coming down to Texas for that? You coming
to Texas? I don't know.
Yeah.
You're gonna invite me?
Let's go.
Maybe. Well, let's
go.
Figure it out. Yeah,
let's do a live podcast from the set.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That'd be really cool. Well, I think, Steven, I'm gonna close out the thing because of time, and the next questions would be totally off theme of what we've been talking about.
Let's go. We got to lighten this up a little bit. Let's go. You want to see one of those childhood impressions, don't you?
Yeah. Well, it was politics and some of the relation to that. The
go for it.
Hegseth coming in, and
oh boy.
So I guess
you're going there. Let me. If you want to talk, I'll say this.
Okay.
Because this movie is apolitical. That was my North Star also. And I said this when I was fortunate enough to do Larry King's show before he passed. And then Larry was like, well, why you? Like, how did you end up here? And I said, because I made a commitment to, despite your political background, your religious beliefs, to sit down and just listen. That's why I'm sitting in front of you today, Larry. And that's what we don't do enough. Right. And so, I lived in a very liberal city for 20 years. It was around bleeding heart liberals. So many of my closest friends are staunch Republicans, deep-rooted conservatives. And if anything, there's love and there's respect. And I don't have this naive look at it all. But I want to tell you this. I had the great honor to attend the American Legion Salute to Heroes Veterans Ball in DC on Monday. And I mean, being in a room with 22 living Medal of Honor recipients is like highlight. I would put that over ever attending the Oscars. And
Oh yeah.
I'm texting my wife, like waiting in line for a cocktail, and I'm just like, I cannot believe I'm not worthy of this moment. You know, I'm not. This is just, and it was wonderful. But I want to tell you, the message that night was a message of peace. And I know that it's something that Ronald Reagan, you know, used to always say, it was peace through strength. But I don't want to be as naive to think that everybody maybe meant it or just said it or whatever. But I'm telling you, I met some wonderful people, and I do believe in my heart of hearts I'm a great judge of character, and they meant it. And you can be cynical about it. You can talk about the military industrial complex, all those things, and I'm sure there's truth in every part of that. But I'm just telling you that in that room that night, I had the honor to be around the very best of us. And what that means is people that were or are willing to give their own life for you. And what does that take? Because we don't all have that. And it was one of the greatest highlights of my life and memories that night that I always cherish. So whatever your political beliefs are, whatever your feeling is, you know, I think that we have an incredible military. I think that the men and women that serve are, I mean, I continually have a lesson in humility on this journey, but just extraordinary sacrifice, extraordinary stories, commitment to country, and I was uplifted. And I went in there as a honored guest, and you know, and a very open mind as I've always had. So when it comes to politics, you know, it's obviously, you know, I'm stating the obvious of, you know, living, you know, in a very divided country, but I encourage people to go outside their bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means, like, you know, not all of us have the time and bandwidth or the money to go on a nationwide road trip where you take 2 months out of your life and go do that. But if you're able to get outside of your bubble, even just within your own community, and meet people that don't have the same background as you, maybe they don't look like you, and they don't speak like you, and they don't think like you. Like, that's the first step. And I'm telling you, it will change your life for the better. It will open your mind. And I don't want to sound so idealistic again and naive to go like that's the answer to it all, but I've lived it. And I'm telling you that, like, it will form and shape you into a better person. And you will be pleasantly surprised that you live in a country of many loving, wonderful, thoughtful, caring people. And it's just so easy to lose sight of that within your own bubble. And, you know, and everybody's experience is valid, and their own journey is valid. But that was for me. And so when I look at, you know, the politics, and, you know, you want to hear it from me, man. When I watch the news cycle, which is rare, but when I do, my filmmaking mind sees what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put in the right catchy music that's going to manipulate your emotions at the right moment. The chyron at the bottom flashes up. Ooh, that's the eye candy. You go to that. What's the headline? You know, then the conjecture that the person reading off a teleprompter, who's an actor, right? And they're having to hit certain lines with certain emphasis to make you at home feel a certain way. Do I want to make you scared? Do I want to make you worried? Do I want to make you feel like this is urgent? And so I see all of that. And so it's hard to unsee that. And so for me, I just don't sort of give into that. And I am an optimist. I'm a serial optimist, and I think we're going to be okay if we just start listening to each other.
I think that's a good place to end, Steven. Yeah, man. Yeah. I think that's a good place to end. We'll end there. And thank you so much, man. I am honored to have you on this tiny podcast of mine.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been great.
Can I ask you one thing before we depart? I'm seeing a marathon bib behind you. Did you run the New York Marathon?
No.
What do you do?
Where am I at? So this one is my first 100-miler. Yeah, that's my first 100.
Oh, you're like
was,
marathon?
yeah.
No. 20.
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, no, I did 26 miles, or that's
Yeah,
child's play.
The 26.2 isn't going to cut it. So yeah, my running experience has been probably a little bit unique, but I went from not being a runner at all because of bad knees, and believing the doctors when they said bad running makes your knees bad or will progress bad knees, and then decided to run a marathon with zero training. And that experience completely shook me. That experience blew up my worldview. And then it wasn't too much longer before I was doing runs to try to raise money for people to get into treatment for free, like high quality treatment. Instead of having to pay $30,000 for it, they can go in for free. And those were that was geared specifically for people that were either homeless or had no access to treatment and that sort of thing, and were ready, And so then I started doing some of those things, and that led me into running 100-milers and that sort of thing.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
As a long distance runner, maybe we can get out there. I started the new year off on January 1st, running a local 10K here, and it was cold, it was wet, but it was glory, man, and it was awesome, and I love it. And we'll have to talk. We'll have to sidebar. Maybe we can both get out there and raise some money for one of your causes.
Oh man, that would be awesome. Yeah, I just ran my first 3 miles since September. I blew my ACL, completely tore it in September in jiu-jitsu, and then so go figure. It was like, wow. After running 100-miler, 3 weeks later, I go figure. The knees are great in the 100-miler, but the jiu-jitsu just tore it to shreds. And then so yesterday was my first time like going beyond 1.5 miles. So I did 3 miles yesterday. It was just it was a very good feeling because no pain. The stability felt good. So keep progressing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, keep going, man. It's a good way to end. One foot in front of the other, brother.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you. It was an honor. Thank you. And thank you, everyone that's listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links.
Others could never understand. I found the tribe that got me and cleared the trail for my quest. My connection to creativity originated by seeing my nature as naughty at best. I became the clay figurines that I sculpted as a child, imagining the defeat of my bullies was my escape in the wild. Using the grit, found the poetry that helped shape me. I pushed forward, hoping to cultivate my identity. Finding hope to attain tenacity through lyrics like these might have caused backlash, but I needed to burn the boats. My future require uncertain path. We gonna break, we gonna bash, we gonna roll, we gonna smash. We gonna break, we gonna bash, we gonna roll, we gonna smash. We gonna dried out pen. Every word on the page critiqued their battles won then lost again. Failure's knocking at the door like an old friend, but I'm pushing on till the bitter end. I took the charge and I stood 10 toes down. Against the odds, chest up, I stood my ground. With every setback, more experience was found. To call them setbacks is putting it nicely. The rejection I faced was backhanded, to call it more concisely. The seat at the table will be earned, resilience and my own dime. Promises made, promises kept was not an experience of mine. Hidden agendas make me crave a blunt rejection just to save time. This only furthers my resolve to keep my pledges as if they were the Father and Son's divine bloodline. We gonna break, we gonna bash, we gonna roll, we gonna smash. We gonna break, we gonna bash, we gonna roll, we gonna smash. We gonna, I notice these shadows I've ran from become obvious at the end of the sunniest days. I receive glory from the work, then the light at the end of the tunnel fades. Even with all that, my maker provides the endurance to continue my crusade, to honor those who've honored us as human barricades. To get my shot, I had to break the locks. In the process, I shed my chains, addressing those inner talks. He says I'm not shy, I'm unconnected, unconfident, and missing my why. The voice in my head feels unseen, uncool and untolerated. Now that the child is heard, he's much more quiet, understood, not sedated. He walks alongside me, watching me mature and handle the stress. He's keeping me accountable when I make a mess. Yo, roll up your sleeves, this is the process. Now I'm here, eager and terrified at what's next. We know anything worth doing ought to put me to the test. The biggest thing I've learned is, it is the suffering that makes this life blessed. Finding hope to attain grit through lyrics like these that might cause backlash. I need to burn the boats, my future requires an uncertain path.